just to worship you. Oh, my soul, come rejoice and take joy, my King Jesus, in what you hear. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound. Oh, let it be a sweet, sweet sound. Oh, let it be a sweet sound in your ear. Take pleasure, take delight in what you hear. Oh, let it be a sweet sound in your ear. Take pleasure, take delight in what you hear. Let it be a sweet sound in your ear. Take pleasure, take delight. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound. Let it be a sweet, sweet sound in your ear. Let incense rise to you, and let it smell like the sweetest perfume. It's my joy to worship you. It's my joy to worship you. And let our incense rise to you, and let it smell like the sweetest perfume. Oh, it's our joy to worship you. It's my joy to worship you. So we tell our soul, wake up, you sleepyhead. The king is waiting for incense to rise. The king is waiting for incense to rise. The bridegroom is ready. The bridegroom is ready. So we break open the jar and pour it out on you. We break open our jars and we pour them out on you. Oh, it's our joy to worship you, Jesus. Yes, it's our joy to worship you. All deserving King, yes, it's our joy to worship you. So let incense rise to you, and let it smell like the sweetest perfume. It's our joy to worship you. Oh, it's our joy to worship you. Oh, we break ourselves open and we pour out our souls. Oh, wake up, you sleepyhead. It's not time to rest. It's not time to sleep. The king is waiting. The bridegroom's ready. The king is waiting. The bridegroom's ready. We pour it out on you. We pour it out on you. We pour out our worship out on you. It's our joy to worship you. Yes, it's our joy to worship you. It's our joy to worship you. It's our joy to worship you. Deserving one.
All right, so everybody that was rocking with us and all of a sudden lost everything. We've got bad weather here. And for that, everything shut down, as a matter of fact. So for whoever may be back, welcome back. I'm trying to join everybody again. Which may take just a second to be able to do that. All right. Trying to hop back in with everybody. If you have a Bible, you can go ahead and open it to Revelation chapter 21. Revelation 21. Trying to find out if the video is actually back in all the places so that I can hop in and see who's all still with us. Yes. All right, here we go. All right, Revelation chapter 21. We're going to read a verse in Revelation 21. And if you have been tracking with us, especially since March, then you realize that there has been a great deal of content that has been shared over the last several months. We have been building a case and point for faithful lovers of Jesus, covenant lovers of Jesus, being willing to actually live for him, honor him, especially in the crazy days that you and I find ourselves to be a part of. I said last week that, and the week before as a matter of fact, that some days I wake up and feel like I'm living in a movie. This is just of epic proportions, unprecedented days, the experience that we are a part of right now, not just locally, but nationally, and then globally to a certain degree, that has connected us all in a very intentional way, at times just seems completely insane. And I'm sure that you share in that sentiment as well from time to time, depending on how the varying degrees of these circumstances may have hit your heart, may have affected your home, or may be influencing your life in some way, whether that be economically, whether that be financially, whether that be politically, whether that be racially, whether that be socially. Whether that be evangelistically, as you are seeking to honor the King and be on mission with him and for him alongside of brothers and sisters, your church family. There are just a lot of ways right now that our lives are experiencing a unique amount of pressure and an unprecedented, and I say unprecedented because these are unprecedented times, at least in my generation for sure, and the almost 40 years that I have been here to have such an experience. Things are, they're just really crazy right now. But right in the midst of it all, we're going to look at a verse in Revelation 21, and I really feel from the Lord to expound on something that I mentioned briefly last week when we opened for worship. And those who were obviously a part of the broadcast last week, you realize that I shared that Anna and I had recently, over the last several weeks, found out that we were expecting. And incredible excitement, fulfillment of the word of the Lord. Our whole family excited. Kids losing their minds. They're getting another sibling like it's on. Everybody is celebrating. Amazing. Amazing, yes, amazing. Actually found out that we were expecting the same day that I suffered the severe stress fracture in my lower back. You see, always, at all times, right? This walk of faith, loving Jesus, is not about a roller coaster ride. It's not about constant ups and downs. I've learned over the what is now 2 decades almost of walking with the Lord, it's not like a roller coaster at all. It's not. It's not like a roller coaster at all. It's more like railroad tracks. And simultaneously, depending on what you choose to give your attention to, you are always going to have reason to celebrate. And there's always going to be some stuff that you can find to complain about. So complaining and celebrating. And it will be up to you, it will be up to us to determine what is going to fill the place of our conversation. Paul says, think on these things in Philippians 4. He says, think on things that are right, things that are true, things that are noble, things that are praiseworthy. Think about these things. There's an intentionality in the place of our mindset to govern our thoughts in obedience to Christ. Paul would have said it in 2 Corinthians 10, we bring every thought captive and then obedient to Jesus. We're always going to have reasons to celebrate, as it was several weeks ago. We're expecting, praise God, amazing. Hey man, you partially broke your back today. I could definitely find some reasons to complain about that because that's not a part of the plan. That was nowhere on the radar. That was unexpected completely. Have you ever had plans and then all of a sudden felt sideswiped by life? Has life in a moment derailed possibly things that in an immediate way you were dreaming about, things that you were giving voice to in prayer, things that you were ready to engage with the activity or the investment of your life? Let me just tell you, partially breaking my back was nowhere on the radar. And for those of you that are asking, because I've been looking through the comments and I've been looking through, see now I feel really bad because I didn't complete the story. People are congratulating me in the comments. This is not just going to be good. For those of you that are asking how I'm feeling, it is amazing and in certain cases supernatural the way that the Lord is accelerating the time frames of my healing. Do I believe that the Lord can heal me in a moment? Yes, we lay hands on people all over the world. I myself have been healed in a variety of ways. My kids have experienced supernatural, instantaneous, just creative miracles in different ways. Do I believe that the Lord can do it in a moment? Yes. But Jesus even said to some, and as you go, you will be healed. And as I've been going through this process, the Lord has been supernaturally accelerating the time frames. So thank you for asking. I feel much, much better than I have. I am 3 weeks in now. They told me that it potentially was going to be somewhere in the 3-4 month range for me to be back to some semblance of normalcy in life. But what they don't understand is that I don't claim to be normal. And so I am not setting myself to believe for the normal time frames. God is going to touch me and it's going to be amazing. And he is writing a wonderful testimony in my life right now through this fracture in my back. Testimonies are cool. But you actually have to go through incredible tests to have testimonies. And so even though I love testimonies, at times when you are going through the test, it's not as amazing as when it's all over and said and done and you reflectively can tell the testimony. But the Lord is building a testimony in my life, and I am grateful that he is able to glorify his great name in the midst of what would seem to be a moment or a process of suffering. So back to people that are congratulating me in the comments. We found out several weeks ago that we were expecting, same day that I found out that I had partially broken my back. I fractured it, lower lumbar around my L5. And a week later, after we had already told all kinds of people, right, shared it with family and friends and all this kinds of stuff. Man, we got plans, we got names, we're praying, anyways. Shortly after that, due to some complications and a couple of doctor's visits, we found out that we miscarried and lost the baby. I'm sorry that I did not get to the details sooner for those of you that have been congratulating me in the comments. Since we are live and this is not pre-recorded content, I wasn't meaning to kind of pull the rug out from under you there. But once again, that was not part of the plans. That was not the way that we had anticipated things going. But you see, what I've come to understand in the days that I've committed to love the Lord, to give him my life, and to honor him with an excellent yes. Because again, nothing says I love you best than giving your whole life. What I've learned is that there's going to be a lot of stuff that we have to go through in life that is not really going to nicely and neatly fit itself into our ability to reason, to be critical thinkers, to analyze. Some things just don't make a lot of sense when you crunch the numbers and look at it on the bottom line. But this verse that we have in Revelation chapter 21, I'm actually going to read verses 3 and 4. And this is what it says. It says, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne, saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them. And they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death, and there will no longer be any mourning or crying or pain. The first things have passed away. And behold, he who sits on the throne said, I am making all things new." In this walk that we have, there's going to be a lot of stuff that we don't understand. There's going to be a lot of things that you just don't like. There's going to be a lot of things that you don't agree with. There's going to be a lot of tension. There's going to be a lot of turmoil. There's going to be a lot of pain and conflict. There's going to be hostility and adversity. There's going to be tears. There's going to be fasting and praying. There's going to be weeping. There's going to be suffering. Yes, there's going to be mountaintops, rejoicing, victories, celebrations. There's going to be, yes, though weeping may endure for a night, joy comes in the morning. And our lives are going to be held in the radical middle of these two tensions. Because what I've learned is that as a lover of Jesus, you are not exempt from the one category that you don't like. And that for most of us is what's going to be the category of pain and suffering, sorrow, tears. We are not exempt from the pain and the pressures and the uncertainties of life. But as a matter of fact, we are in the world, but yes, we are not of the world. But while we are in the world, we are not exempt from the experiences that the people in the world are going through, because you and I are going to have to go through life, face life, confront life, interact with life. And at times, things are going to come upon us by way of our life experience that we just don't understand. But part of the way that we perceive suffering, and part of, if we could say it this way, the theology that we create for suffering will determine the quality of life that we experience while our lives are still bound in the tension of what seems like two opposite extremes. Because right now we are living in the tension of now and not yet. Yes, the verse that we read from Revelation 21, behold, we are awaiting that great day when God will dwell in the midst of his people, and he will physically establish his throne upon the earth, and he will rule in the midst of us. He will illuminate everything, so there will be no more darkness. There will be no more tears. Praise God forever. We will be with him. He will be among us, and everything will be amazing. We believe that. Things are amazing right now, but they're not as amazing as they are going to be. We are bound up in the tension of now and not yet, because we do believe that Jesus has come, and through his suffering, through the laying down of his life, through his willingness to bear the cross, to be buried, to experience death, hell, to be resurrected by the power of the Spirit, to dwell among them, teaching them about the kingdom, and then to ascend into the heavens. We do believe that Jesus' suffering in his coming has now made a way for him to secure every promise that God has made. Jesus has secured redemption and reconciliation. He has secured redemption and reconciliation. And we are awaiting the day when the Son of Man will come riding upon the clouds, when the trumpet will sound, as 1 Thessalonians 4 says, and the lightning will flash, and the sky will crack, and the clouds will part, and we will see him coming riding upon the clouds with a host, myriads upon myriads of angelic host. And the dead in Christ will rise, and those who are alive at the time of his appearing will be gathered together, and we will ascend to be gathered to him in the cloud, to descend to the earth, to rule alongside of him, a bride without spot, wrinkle, or blemish, of glorious, victorious church, radiant and illuminated, glorified forever as an eternal companion alongside of the bridegroom, where the bridegroom, the beloved son, will finally be presented with the bride that he laid his life down for, and the Father's great delight and his joy to hand over to the kingdom all authority and dominion and a rule and government and all jurisdiction to the Son that he loves forever and ever and ever with no end. We are awaiting that great day when the full measure of everything that God has desired that was secured in Jesus' first coming will be realized for us together in Christ. Praise God. But until then, how we handle suffering is going to determine much of our development. You see, because suffering is a beautiful tool in the hand of the Lord to conform us to the image of his Son, that being Jesus. You see, Romans 8 tells us that if we will suffer with him, will we not also be glorified with him? Romans 8 tells us that God is working all things together for good. Here, all things, not just the some things that you think are aimed at the things that you want God to do, not just when you believe that you're on a specific trajectory and you can make sense of the pieces of your life and put the puzzle together to make it look like what you want it to look like. No, all things. All things meaning even the things that you don't understand, even the things that are devastating, even the things that are painful, even the things that you would not have chosen for yourself. All things, while we live under the tension of suffering. Because until Jesus returns, the beasts still have a certain place of activity in the earth. Powers and principalities still have an allowance. There is just the tension, the conflict of the kingdoms of this world and the kingdom of our God. The kingship of Jesus and powers and principalities in an earthly realm. We are living in the tension, and part of that tension produces suffering. But we don't suffer like the rest of the world because, again, we are not the rest of the world. As a believer in Jesus, you don't suffer like the rest of the world. And because we don't suffer like the rest of the world, this is what makes us a hope-filled people. Because we don't suffer like the rest of the world, this is one of the things that sets us apart. This is one of the defining factors that makes us, or that defines us as an otherworldly agent in the earth. We are not in the world like the rest of the world, because God has taken up residency on the inside of us. And Jesus has not abandoned us as orphans, for he has promised that he is going to prepare a place for us. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man the things that God has prepared for they that love him. Jesus said, "For I am going to prepare a place for you. And if it were not so, then I would just tell you, because in my Father's house there are many rooms." There are many rooms. So we are not in the world like the rest of the world. As a matter of fact, Paul says that if what we believe is not true, then we among all men are to be pitied. That we should be pitied. But what we believe is true. And our whole premise of faith is founded upon God being a man, suffering well. Hear that? Suffering well, for I delight to do your will. I know that I have the power and the ability. I could leverage my own gifts and power to where this cup would pass from me. But not my will, your will be done. The crushing in the garden of intercession produces the delight to be conformed to the image so that we can suffer well to bear the cross in God being glorified in our lives. And we have the Spirit. And our whole base or premise, the foundation of what we believe, is on God becoming a man, suffering well to the point of death, and then being raised, being resurrected from the dead by the power of the Spirit as a glorified man, now forever, ascending into the heavens. Paul says, if this is not true, then we of all men are to be pitied. But it is true. And the conversation of suffering well for the sake of bearing his image and being conformed to his image is a conversation at times that I believe even in our Western Americanized culture is just foreign. It's just foreign. Because we have so much luxury and so much opportunity. We have so much available to us. In our American entitlements and in our wealth. You see, we live better than the majority of the world, while poverty floods the earth on a variety of ways, while the rest of the world experiences being destitute, being broken, being lowly. We, in our Americanized entitlements, live in a land of luxury and opportunity. And that's not to say that we are to be shamed or that we are to be guilt-ridden because of where we live, but I think that we must understand our context and be accountable to the conversation and have our lives bear the image of Jesus well as it comes by the scriptures and not just in our contextualization of an American version of the gospel where we eliminate things that we never want to be true and only preach the things that we like that align well with our ambition, our dreaming, and our goals. Because again, at a certain point, we have to be willing to put down the American dream and pick up Jesus' dream. And for this conversation, we're going to look at an individual in the scriptures by the name of Job. Because I don't think that we can talk about suffering well without gleaning from Job's life. You see, we are introduced to Job in chapter 1, and this is not going to be an exhaustive 42 chapter explanation. But in chapter 1, we're introduced to Job. And we're introduced to Job because God brings him up. We're introduced to Job because in the opening verses of Job chapter 1, we find that the enemy has come and he is presented before the Lord. And when God questions the accuser or the adversary, he asks him, where have you come from? And he says, roaming to and fro throughout the earth. You see, Peter says, for you, the enemy, for the devil, for Satan, roams to and fro throughout the earth like a lion, seeking whom he may devour. And he says, I've come from to and fro throughout the earth. And listen to these words. God says, have you considered Job? There's nobody like him. He's upright. He loves me. He walks with me. He shuns evil. He walks in righteousness. I have nobody else like him. Now notice, God brings him up. In the conversation of the enemy looking for someone to tempt, someone to test, God brings up Job. And yes, they go back and forth, and the enemy says, well, the only reason that, Job walks with you the way that he does, and the only reason that he's faithful to you is because, you won't let anything happen to him. You've hemmed him in on every side, and you've blessed the work of his hands, and Job lives in abundance, right? Job lives in prosperity, right? Job never has to go through adversity. Job never has any problems, and that's the only reason that he's faithful to you is because you won't actually let anything happen to him. Let me just say that if your faith only works when things are working for you, then you don't really have a faith that works. And this is the accusation of the enemy against Job. The only reason that you think he's faithful to you is because you won't actually let anything test his faithfulness. You won't actually allow anything to befall him that is going to test him in a way where adversity is going to have the opportunity to expose him. But I promise you, if you let me touch him, I'll prove to you that he is not who you think he is. And rather than God being intimidated by the challenge, right? Because the enemy wants to test Job because he has an accusation about him. God allows the enemy to test Job because even though the enemy wants to test him, God has a testimony about him. There's nobody like him. You want to test that? Go right ahead. But he's not saying it about himself. I'm saying it about him. Man, what could it be for the Lord to say your name and to say there's nobody like him? There is nobody like her in all the earth. I don't have anybody that walks with me the way that she does. There's nobody in the earth that is upright, that shuns evil, that is faithful to me the way that he is. You want to bring something upon his life. You want to confront him with something that you ultimately think is going to destroy him and the testimony that I have about him. Go right ahead. You can touch what belongs to him, but you cannot actually touch him. Go right ahead. And if you're familiar with the details of the story, you understand that over the time that it takes to eat a Big Mac and fries, Job loses everything. He loses everything. He loses all of his cattle, all of his livestock. He loses all of his property. He loses all of his servants. He sits down to have a meal, and in the midst of having a meal, there are people that come to him to bring him the announcement of things that are being cut out of and away from his life. Things that were not a part of the plan. Job is being sideswiped by life, and it is happening in real time, and it is happening real fast. Job gets 4 announcements. You've lost all your livestock. You've lost all your servants. You've lost all your property. And as a matter of fact, all your kids were gathered together in one location, and you have lost all of them. Talk about a bad day. Talk about a bad day. And it says that in response to this, you know what? We'll read it together. In response to this, the Bible says that Job, it's not that he has some special grace where he's not going to feel it. It's not where he has some special supernatural shield to where the trauma, the emotional impact of what he is going through in real time, in real life, he does not have some supernatural shield or grace that is going to preserve him from actually having to experience the full measure of it while it's happening to him. It's not there. And while he is going through this, it says, then Job arose and tore his robe. Man, have you ever been so beside yourself that you just started tearing your clothes up? I have not yet. Maybe wanted to, but haven't actually. He shaved his head and fell to the ground and worshiped. Job loses everything but his wife. And his immediate, not rehearsed, not premeditated, not well thought through, not prophetic word in advance that on a certain day at a certain time so that he can ready himself to make sure that he has the right response. Again, this is in real time, and it's coming in real hard, and it's happening real fast. And Job's immediate, this is what bubbles up out of him. This is what erupts from his heart. This is the first thing that comes out of his life in response to what he is going through in life. Yes, he rips his clothes because life is real. Yes, he shaves his head because, man, this is serious. But he worships. He doesn't start complaining. He doesn't start criticizing. He doesn't get deeply depressed. He doesn't completely just go bankrupt in a panic-filled frenzy. He worships. He worships. And he says, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. But blessed be the name of the Lord. And through all of this, Job did not sin, right? James tells us that the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Paul tells us in Ephesians 4, it's okay to be angry, but don't let your anger give way to sin, and don't give a foothold, or don't give a place. Don't create a crack or a crevice or a window opening for the devil. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to feel the full depth of the emotion, the sting of circumstances. It's okay to be in it as it is happening to you. But Job's eruption, Job's response, Job's immediate initial return to God is one of worship. And in this, it says that he doesn't sin and he doesn't blame God. How we suffer tells us a lot about who we believe God is. You may not like the way that sounds. How we suffer tells us a lot about who we believe God actually is. You see, Job isn't all twisted, trying to blame God and to wonder, why are you doing this to me? Right? Yes, as we progress through Job's life, Job is conflicted. Job understands that he loves him. Job understands that he's been faithful to him. Job understands that he has not necessarily done something that has warranted what it is that he's going through in life. But much of that conversation that begins to happen in Job's heart as it is happening is not one that we see that is initiated from the inside of Job himself. As a matter of fact, it says that when Job's friends hear about what Job is going through, right? Because it doesn't actually just stop there. Job loses everything, and here the enemy comes again. Here he comes again. And Job is still walking with the Lord. Job is still faithful to God. Job is still keeping his righteousness. His vision of the Lord is still intact, and he will not deny him or compromise his faithfulness to him. And the enemy comes back, and God says, see, I told you. And the enemy says, well, the only reason that he's faithful to you, sure. You let me touch everything that he has. Cool. That's great. But if you let me touch him, I promise you, he's going to deny you, and he will curse you to your face. And God says, you can touch him, but you can't have his life. You can touch him, but you can't have his life. You see, I feel like somebody needs to hear that right now. You've been touched. And they're traumatic right now. Things are bad when you evaluate them and when you weigh them against how things used to be or how potentially things could be. There have been some very, very broken moments that I have experienced in life. There have been some incredibly let's say, dark moments where the accusation of the enemy and the weapons that have been formed against me and the tests as they have happened in real time and come in real hard in real life have just been overwhelming to me. You see, it's one thing. Job says, man, for the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, but blessed be the name of the Lord. Job has determined, you can almost hear it echoed in the voice of Paul when Paul says, I'm not talking to you because I'm living in a place of want in Philippians 4, because I've actually learned how to live in opposite extremes. There's been days of mountaintops and victories and celebrations and abundance, but there's also been days of trials and pain and sacrifice and suffering. And I have actually learned the secret, because there's a secret. It's not one side or the other, but it's the radical middle. And I've learned that it has nothing to do with the opposite extremes or trying to leverage my way into either side, but it is actually Christ in me that is the hope of glory. It's God in me. And it's the fact that my hope is found in Christ. That my hope is found, that I have been filled with a divine spirit, that the life of God is pulsing through my veins because He has taken up residency on the inside, and I am no longer bound to having to respond to life the way the rest of the world does, because I no longer fit in the category of the rest of the world. And all of the world's wants, and all of the world's governance, and all of the power of the rulers of the air are no longer what binds me. I have been freed from having to actually engage or interact with life and to be humbled and pummeled and crushed by it the way the rest of the world does. Because God is in me, I don't have to go looking for pills. Because God is in me, I don't have to frequent the liquor store. Because God is in me, I don't have to give way to pity parties. Because God is in me, I don't have to have sobbing sessions where I just find people to celebrate my lowliness and brokenness so that I can identify in a worldly way that I will never ever be able to get better, and that it's just understood that I'm going to camp out here forever. I am no longer categorized with the rest of the world, and so I don't suffer like they do. I've been freed by God's life on the inside of me. For the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Regardless of what happens to me in this life, blessed be the name of the Lord. And the only reason that He's faithful to you is because you won't let me touch Him. And God says, you want to touch Him? Touch Him. And Job actually develops. We're not really going to get into it, but when you study it out a little bit, Elephantiasis is a condition where massive sores and boils on the outside of his body and on the interior. At one point, he talks about how his breath smells like death, and how even down his throat and felt up on his insides are these pores and sores, and there's this pus. And he says at one time, I'm sitting and I'm scraping myself, trying to relieve myself from the itching and the burning and the pain and the suffering of what it is that I'm going through. And what we actually find is that Job gets touched in every way possible, to the point where even his wife says, why won't you just curse God and die? Oh man. You see, you have to be very careful of people in your life that would rather see you have a breakdown than get a breakthrough. Who is close to you really matters. The voices that you allow to have a place of influence in your heart really matter. And Job not only has the voice of his wife, who in a moment is encouraging to him because of the devastation that has come upon Job's life. It is now to such a degree that his wife is surveying his life and is encouraging him and almost exhorting him. It would just be better to die, bro. Because the way that you're living and what you're having to go through, bro, it would just be better to die. Like, just go ahead and get it over with, man. Like, curse God and die. Be very aware of those that would rather see you have a breakdown than those who are encouraging you to get a breakthrough. Some people just want to get real close to you so that they can see you unravel and break down. You got to be very aware of who's on the inside and the motives that fill their heart. And as if this isn't bad enough, Job has 3 buddies that hear about what he's going through. And they come to visit him from afar. And it says that when they get there, they take the first 7 days. And when they're looking at how much pain, because Job is numb and sitting in silence. He doesn't know what to say. He no longer even knows what to pray. He is just seated in a place of being fully overwhelmed, consumed. He is absorbed into the bubble of his life experience. And they come and they sit with him for 7 days. And it was actually the best 7 days that he had spent with these guys. Because when they start talking, all the nonsense begins. And they begin to evaluate Job's life. And we're just going to summarize a much longer story from this point forward. Because there's somewhere that we're actually going. You see, I'm trying to build something here. They sit around Job. And they want to, by way of their own self-righteous evaluation, they want to convince Job that he must have sinned, because there is no possible way that he could be going through hardship if he had been faithful to God. You see, again, the theology that we create about suffering reveals to us much about what we believe about who God is. And if we believe that in our faithfulness to the Lord, it will never put us on a pathway where we have to confront suffering, where we never have to experience hardship, where sorrow and trial and pain will never be a part of our experience, then for one, we will have to eliminate much of what the New Testament actually writes as a way to encourage us and exhort us in the place of being faithful to God through suffering, in light of a vision of the age to come and what we actually believe in the fullness of the proclamation of the gospel, and where we've laid our hope and our anchor into the person of Jesus and his kingdom. We would have to get rid of a lot of what the New Testament says, as it encourages us in the very place that we believe our life should be able to avoid as we are faithful to the Lord. So that's first and foremost. We'll have to get rid of a lot of what the New Testament actually encourages. But secondarily, we will feel very abandoned. And it will be hard for us to reconcile God's nearness when we are going through things that we don't like. But this is the conversation that Job's friends initiate with him. Hey man, listen, I hear what you're saying. But bro, let me just keep it real, man. Like, you could tell us, right? Like, we're cool, right? Like, we're boys. Like you did something, man. We know it. There's no way that you'd be going through what you're going through if you hadn't done something. There's no way. Like, you did something. Spill the beans, right? Like, go ahead and tell us. Like, it's cool. We won't tell nobody. We'll keep it between us and Facebook, right? Like, it's cool. And as it progresses, Job is deeply troubled, because Job begins to recount his own faithfulness to the Lord, how he watched over widows and orphans, how he provided for the poor and the needy. He begins to recount the faithfulness of his life and the righteousness that he has committed himself to as he has walked with the Lord for whatever time period. And Job actually comes to a place where he begins to despise even the day of his own birth. Where he's like, man, if this is the way that my life is going to go, it would be better for me if I had never even been born. But Job is holding fast to his confession. And yeah, he comes to places when you read through his life. At one point, he says, man, if God were here, I'd put him on the stand and I'd question him to his face, and I'd make him tell me what it is that I did to deserve this. Right? There's places even in our own investigation of our heart and life and our faithfulness to the Lord where we must expose who we believe he is in the midst of suffering and pain and sorrow. Because if we do not create the right perspective or frame our theology correctly, when we go through broken, painful, tear-filled moments, again, we will feel incredibly distant or abandoned by God himself. Right? Job says, if God were here, I would put him on the stand. Have you been through hard times where you felt like God was nowhere to be found? Have you been through moments where it felt like, because the pain of your circumstance, that God had checked out on you? Because of the degree of suffering that you were experiencing, that the Lord was distant and that he was not near, that he was not here, that he was not present. Or do you perceive the one who sits with us and rests with us in the midst of the storm? Can you see the one who weeps with you as he did with those when he caught word of Lazarus dying? It says he wept and he sat with them in the midst of their pain, in the midst of their misunderstanding, in the midst of things that it was hard for them to be able to reconcile actually having to happen, being that God was as close to them as he was. You see, if we don't frame in our understanding of the Lord in a way that creates a place for us to be able to suffer well, then we will never be able to find the redemptive purpose to the suffering that we experience. Because our suffering is not in vain. Our suffering, again, is not the way that the world suffers. But there is a redemptive purpose that God will initiate and use as he is working all things together for good when we are going through things that we would determine are not really good when they are happening. Again, he is working all things together for good. Now, this does not mean that God initiated it. This does not mean that God is somehow out to get you. This does not mean that God created a bunch of circumstances and then leveraged them against you like a tidal wave. But what it does mean is that as we are living in the experience in the earth between two tensions where the kingdom has not yet been fully realized in the measure of God's desires in an ultimate way, which is what is going to be our experience when Jesus returns, that until that great day, you and I are going to go through life. We are going to have weapons formed against us. There's going to be the hostility of the powers of the air. There is going to be the rulers of the age, and it's going to be all of what is being created and used against us as a way to get us to bow down to them and it instead of the continual bowing of our knee to Jesus as King. And if we do not understand, first and foremost, that though God does not initiate suffering, that it does not fall outside of his jurisdiction to be able to use our suffering towards a redemptive purpose, because again, he is working all things together for good. But you don't get it, Mike. Like, man, what I'm going through, it doesn't seem good. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't feel good. That does not mean that it falls outside of the boundaries of God being able to work it together for good. But I don't understand. Well, that's great because we have peace that surpasses all understanding. And at times there's going to be things in life that eclipses our natural ability to rhyme and reason and analyze nicely and neatly how what I'm going through is serving any purpose at all. And this is actually where Job ends up finding himself. I don't even know where this is going anymore. And then you've got his three friends that are constantly reminding him why he has done something wrong. Let me just encourage you. At times, you can do everything right and still end up right in the middle of pain and sorrow and suffering. You can do everything the right way. You can do everything to honor the Lord. You can do everything to be faithful to God. You can read as much as you're supposed to read. You can pray as much as you feel you're supposed to pray. You can attend your meetings. You can give in the offering. You can do right by loving your neighbors and still end up having a barrage of suffering fall upon your life. And how we suffer and bear his image in the midst of our trials will end up either redemptive redemptively serving God's purposes, or we will just end up spinning our wheels in futility because we will choose to suffer the way that the rest of the world does. And in our grief, we'll complain. In our pain, we'll criticize. In our trauma, we'll feel like God has abandoned us. In our place of devastation and being destitute, being broken, being vulnerable, we'll feel like God is nowhere near, as if he's distant, as if he's checked out on us, as if he's moved on to somewhere else and someone else. But you see, that's the way that the rest of the world suffers. But those of us that have intimate access to a loving Father, those of us who are very close in proximity and a beautiful fellowship, we don't suffer the way the rest of the world does. Hear these words from Paul in Philippians 3. Oh, that I might know him in the fellowship of his sufferings and in the power of his resurrection. In speaking of Jesus in Hebrews 5, it said that with loud cries and tears, he lifted his voice to the one that was able to save him. But that he became perfect and learned obedience through what he suffered. And that having become perfected by his obedience through suffering, that he became a redemptive offering, a perfect sacrifice. Suffering well can serve God's redemptive purposes in the earth if we choose to create the right framework in the place of suffering to allow God to work our suffering together for good because we love him, because we're called by his name according to his purposes, and our lives are patterned after the Son, the suffering servant, the one who had all power yet used it to lay his life down, and because he did so in the place of learning obedience became perfect. Therefore, the redemptive offering on behalf of all mankind, because Jesus said, unless a seed, John 12:32, falls into the ground and dies, it won't be broken open and it won't be actually able to reap a harvest. We have to understand that as our lives are sown into the soil of the earth, we're going to go through hardship and suffering. And that in the brokenness of our lives, the way that we suffer and suffering well to pattern our lives after Jesus and to bear his image is going to serve a redemptive purpose. Because God will not allow our suffering in vain. And Job actually experiences this. Mike, what do you mean our suffering carries a redemptive purpose? Right, let's fast forward towards the end of Job's life. Job has a lot of questions, and God shows up in Job 40. And in the closing chapters of Job's life, we have God coming to Job in Job 40. And God actually tells him, you thought you had some questions for me? Right? Now I'm going to come down and question you to your face like a man. Oh, man. Sorry, I needed that. He says, I'm going to come down and question you to your face. Right, Mr. Tough Stuff? I'm going to come, right? Because at times, like, we feel like the whole world is about us. Right? Like, man, if God were here, I'd do this. And man, like, if God were here, I'd do that. And man, like, where are you at? And like, da, 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 da. And God comes to him. And let me just tell you, Job didn't feel so tough when God came. God comes to him. And he begins to go through this process of reminding Job how powerful he is. And revealing to Job how he's actually not just Lord over his life, not just God in his life, but that he's God of all creation and even the cosmos. And he says, where were you when I hung the stars? Where were you when I determined the boundaries of the waves? Where were you when I defined how fast certain animals would be able to run? Where were you when I was doing all of these things? You were nowhere to be found. Job, I actually know what I'm doing, and I'm actually controlling all things by the word of my power. I've got this. But he actually comes to Job, and what I enjoy which is very tough to enjoy when I'm going through things that are difficult. But what I do enjoy as I evaluate Job's life is that nowhere in the closing chapters of Job's experience do we have communicated to us that God was ever interested in informing him about the things that he's going through. Because God is more interested in conforming us than at times he is informing us. Nowhere do you find God informing Job, hey man, listen, this is actually what was going on. This is why you had to go through what you went through. Hey bro, chill out. I know that it was tough. I know things were difficult. I know that you've been riding the wave for a little while. It looked like you were going to be buried and drowned, but hey bro, listen, I got you. Like I'm here now. Like everything's going to be good. Let me fill you in on the backstory. Job doesn't get it. But what Job does get is an unveiling of the beauty and the power and the majesty of God in the place of his creation and his ability to sustain all things according to his desires, even at times things that we can't reconcile being a part of the experience, carrying any redemptive purpose in the earth, period. Job gets zero explanation. But what actually ends up happening is Job gets an encouragement to pray for his friends. You see, because the beautiful thing about Job's story is that Job just didn't go through what he went through. He had to go through what he went through with other people around. You see, some of us are cool as long as we get to suffer in private. Some of us are great, right? As long as we can have our blowout sessions and our meltdowns when nobody else is around, right? Some of us are very proficient at being able to keep our conduct and the imagery alive whenever it's in a public sphere or in a public eye. But yet when we're in private, we realize that there's very real tension, there's very real brokenness, there's very real exposure, but we're able to keep it under wraps and put the filter on and keep things good so that everybody can get what we want them to see. Job doesn't have that luxury. Job is going through the hostility of adversity, and there are other people that have close proximity. But this is what's really important, is there are very important moments and seasons of your life where God is going to allow other people to have an intimate vantage point, not just to see what you go through, but to see the way you go through it. To see the way you go through it. Because again, this is when we shine the brightest. This is when the illuminating of our lives in dark moments and seasons becomes real. This is when the otherworldly nature, again, the residence of a divine spirit on the inside of us actually gets to create visibility for the glory of God. This is when our lives are tested, when our lives are tempted, when our lives are broken open, when the seed is actually getting cracked and all of what is bound up on the inside gets revealed. This is when we hang in place in a dark night sky, but we shine the brightest. This is when we are a people that are set apart. This is when we become a city on a hill. This is when the hope that fills our lives actually becomes real and visible to others, not when they just get to hear us preach about things that we went through, but nobody actually get to see how we went through it. No, that's not actually how it works all the time. Again, testimonies are amazing, and you may hear people tell incredible testimonies. You may hear people talk about seasons that they went through. You may not always necessarily have access to someone that is suffering and bearing God's image in a right way that is serving a redemptive purpose. You may not always have that, but Job was not able to escape that. And Job is going through it, and he's got his friends that are up close and personal, and they're watching how he goes through it. I want to encourage you that the rest of the world is watching you. You have people that God has strategically placed in your life that he's trying to create an intimate vantage point for. There are people that God has given proximity to you because of the things that are happening to you. There are people that have close proximity to you because of the things that you're about to go through. There are people that have an up close and personal front row seat to your life because God understands the testimony that he has about you. And if I could say it this way, and who cares? All of the controversy that it may create, I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say it the way that I see it and the way that I believe it to be true. God trusted Job to suffer well. He trusted Job to suffer well. Have you considered Job? There's nobody like him. I promise you, you can touch him, and he's not going to crack. You can put him through things that the rest of the world goes through, and he's not going to act like them. You can try to break him with all of your might, and he's not going to bow his knee to you. You can crack him open, but I know what's on the inside of him. You can strip everything off of him, but I know that he'll worship me. You can test him on every side, but I know that he will continue to bless me because he has found contentment in me, and my spirit in him has freed him from having to respond the rest of the way that the world does. I believe with all of my heart that God trusted Job to suffer well. Now you might say, that's blasphemous, that's heresy. I believe that God trusted Jesus to suffer well. You see, because in our suffering well, God is able to use our suffering to serve a redemptive purpose. Because Job's friends were able to watch him while he went through what he went through, in chapter 42, God actually speaks to one of Job's buddies. And he actually gets to speak to him in a loving way that convicts his heart. Because he tells him, I have something against you. You didn't speak well of me the same way that Job did while you were watching what he was going through. Your idea of who I am and what I'm about is twisted. The way that you've perceived me is not right, because as you sat next to someone who was suffering, you had ideas about me that were not true. There were things that you believe about me that are not the way that they are. And as a matter of fact, Job's friends respond well, and they bring the offering that God prescribes. And it says that Job prays for his friends, and that his friends actually get reconciled to the Lord at the end of Job's process of suffering. We just tend to focus on the fact that Job gets double at the end. That he gets a bunch of more property, he gets a bunch of more finances, he gets a bunch of more servants, he gets a bunch of more kids. Let me just go ahead and say it to you this way. If I lose a kid, right? If I lose one, which I shared with you that we did. So if I lose one, it doesn't matter to me if somewhere down the road I get 2 more or 3 more. 2 more or 3 more is great, praise God. But I'm not prophesying either. My wife is going to kill me. 2 more or 3 more, I'm not prophesying. But the point that I'm making is that the 2 more or 3 more are not going to be a satisfactory substitute for the pain of the one that I know I do not have. It doesn't all of a sudden like make it really cool, right? And we can preach, but at the end Job got double for his trouble, and and if you just stay faithful to God, he's going to bless you, and it's going to be a divine doubling and all this. All of that is nonsense when you're the one that's actually going through the pain, when you're the one that has had a season of adversity. All of that type of motivation you realize is futile, because what we have gone through is real. This isn't like fake. This isn't like an imaginary season or cycle of events. And again, Job is not shielded from the trauma of what he has been through. But at the end of it, because he goes through it the right way, it serves a redemptive purpose. Because he goes through it the right way, Job's friends actually end up getting reconciled to the Lord. You see, at the end of it, Job gets to pray for his friends because they watched a man who, under all of the pain and the pressure of life, stayed faithful to God. Because they were able to see that while Job's world was shaking, that there was something of a divine nature and empowerment that was able to sustain his faithfulness to God, even at times when his human ability or capacity would have seemed to fall short. In the most hostile of circumstances, Job never compromised the goodness of God. How does this make any sense, and what does this have to do with us? Let me just ask you, over the last several months, how have you been suffering? Over the last several months, when epidemics and pandemics and viruses and sickness and plague, when economic crash, when social distancing, it should be more physical distancing than social distancing, when the pain, when the racial tension, when the suffering and the hostility, when all of these unique pressures have seemed to cause our world to shake, personally, locally, and globally, how have you handled the suffering? Is it serving a redemptive purpose? Are there other people that have been circled round about you that are beginning to question what's different about you? You don't seem to be broken the rest of the way, or the rest of the way the rest of the world is. You don't seem to be depressed like everybody else. How can you have joy in the midst of what seems to be complete uncertainty? How can you have peace that surpasses, it eclipses the natural ability to reason well the things that are happening to us? How are these things possible? You see, while the rest of the world is trying to cope, is trying to manage, is trying to numb and mask the pain of the circumstances that we are going through, we are in the world, but we are not of the world. So we should not respond nor behave like the rest of the world, because there is a divine spirit that has taken up residency on the inside, and suffering is part of our life experience. How are you suffering? There are people that are close to you that have been watching you suffer. And I feel to encourage you, there are people that are close to you, but you have not yet opened up your life for them to be able to see how you're suffering. There are people that are close to you that think that everything is great when you know that it's not. There are people that are close to you that think that everything is going well when you know on the inside that you've just shielded it, you've masked it, you've created images and filters in a way that has kept alive the image that you want people to keep intact about their perception of who you are. And there are people that are close to you that need to see the way that you are going through what it is that you are going through, because God is desiring to be able to reach those that He has strategically positioned in places of close proximity to you. Because think about it this way. It's almost as if God tells the enemy, you want to touch him? Watch out. Because I promise you, if you touch him, I'm going to get everybody that's close to him. You touch him, I know that he's going to be faithful to me. And in the end, I'm going to work all of this together for good, and I'm going to turn this over on your head. And what the enemy meant for evil and destruction, I am going to redeem, and I'm going to fill it with resurrection life, and my glory is going to saturate it, and I am going to be revealed in the midst of it. And if you want to touch Job, I'm going to get everybody that's close to him, and I'm going to reconcile all of those that come alongside of him. And I will not only be glorified in him, but I'll be glorified in everybody that has a vantage point to see the way that he is going to suffer well for my name's sake. But can the same be said of you? If God lets something happen to you, does he get anybody else other than you? You see, because when he only gets you, it's complaining. When he only gets you, it's all of that sorrow and pity party. When he only gets you, it's all of the criticizing, and it's all of the accusation against who God is and where God is and why this and how that. But when you understand that there's a divine spirit on the inside of you that has freed you from having to actually suffer the rest of the way that the world does, then you can be faithful to God in the midst, not in spite of, in the midst of things that nobody else understands, things that other people beside you, around you, when similar things have happened to them, it has crushed them. It has completely buckled them. They have tapped out. They are no longer around. But when it happened to you, there was something about you that was otherworldly. When it happened to you, there was something about you that didn't make sense. When it happened to you, you were touched, but you weren't crushed. You were forsaken, it seemed like, but God was not distant. He was near. He was real. He was overwhelming. You see, it was almost like God said, you touch Job, That's cool. I'll let you touch him because I'm going to get his friends. Right? 1 Corinthians 2. Had the rulers of this age actually known what they were doing when they put Jesus on the cross, they never would have crucified the Lord of glory. It's almost as if to say, you want to crucify me? I'll let you crucify me. I'll lay my life down. I will subject myself to my own systems that I've created to satisfy the enemy's accusation against me. And then, when a seed is sown into the soil and it's cracked open, we're going to begin to reap a harvest. You touch me, I'm going to get millions upon millions of others that I'll bring along with me, because I'm going to suffer and suffer well, because it is my delight to do your will. And I will suffer well for the sake of my Father being glorified in me. And when the Son of Man is lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men unto myself. And when God was lifted up in Job's life and he would not compromise his place of faithfulness to Job or to God, then he was able to draw Job's friends. When we suffer well, we can bear his image in what may seem like the most broken of life experiences. And when those that are around us and close to us have a way to watch us as we go through things that should very easily crush us, kill us, and knock us out of the game, at the end of it, God will not only be able to restore, but he'll be able to redeem, and he'll be able to reconcile. Yes, Job had restored to him seemingly the things that he lost, but he also redeemed the process of suffering that Job went through. And he was able to reconcile Job's friends that had close proximity and a vantage point to be able to watch him suffer well. I just want to encourage you that as we are continuing to go through what we're going through, there are some of us that have just completely created a conversation that we will resume our faithfulness to the Lord whenever things get back to normal. That we'll resume our faithfulness, that we'll pick back up our devotion, that maybe we'll start the fire again, that we'll get going again. And we've completely dismissed, we've almost checked out of the season that we're in right now and the suffering that has fallen upon us individually, yes, but then corporately as a global body. I would encourage you that these are wonderful days to suffer well for the sake of the gospel and the glory of God, and to allow God in the midst of, again, not in spite of, in the midst of, to create all things to be used towards a redemptive purpose. And that through the shaking of our lives, we might actually create a way for God to shake the world around us. But that we can be faithful to him, and that we can honor him. We can be faithful to him, and we can honor him as we suffer well. Because again, in Romans 8:17, for if we suffer with him and for him, will we not also be glorified alongside of him? I will close where I started. Jesus is worth living for. Even at times when living for him and honoring him is incredibly difficult because of the way that our life has been positioned in a circumstantial way. But he's worth living for. But he is also to die for. For they overcame him, the influence and the attack, the weapons of the enemy, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Testimonies are amazing. They're wonderful. May the blood of the Lamb secure a testimony for himself in our lives, loving not their own lives, even unto the point of death. May we live for him in a faithful way, And even when confronted with the cost of our very lives, may we find enough in him to see him as one that is to die for. Thank you, King Jesus, for opening up a way for us to no longer be bound to the ruler of the age, to powers and principalities. Thank you, King Jesus, for your own Spirit and the life of God that has taken up residence on the inside of our lives. Thank you for completely crippling the strength of the attempt of the wicked one over us by crushing us and causing us to compromise, to forfeit, to recant. But thank you, O worthy one, that you have secured a testimony for yourself in us, because it is your life that fills us. Thank you for the opportunity to suffer with you. Thank you for the fellowship of your sufferings. Thank you for the beauty of communion at times that can only be known when our lives are being cracked wide open. For I do this for you, my body broken, my blood poured out. Thank you, Lord, that you have become the pattern because you have paved the way. Broken, wide open, and bleeding out. Making a way for our lives to be reconciled to God. And I ask you, Lord, that in moments when it feels like our lives are being broken wide open and we are bleeding out, would you, by your own power, use the suffering of our lives to serve a redemptive purpose? And would you reconcile as many people to yourself as you can? Because may you have a faithful place in us where you trust us to suffer well. There's nobody like you. And even as you said of Job, I don't have anybody like him. I don't have anybody like him. Oh, how it would completely and radically revolutionize your life to hear God speak those words over you. I don't have anybody like you. Thank you, Lord, for what you're doing in us. Thank you for the way that it is shaking the rest of the world around us, even when it seems like our world personally is shaking also. We are not shaking the way the rest of the world is shaking. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your nearness. The Lord gives and the Lord taketh away, but blessed be the name of the Lord. Yeah. Thank you for those of you that have been sending in your prayer requests. Our team really does take time and pray for those. We're grateful that you would send them in. I'm just tracking through the comments to see if there was anything that I could speak to. Yeah. So, we love you guys. We are praying for you guys. We are grateful that you take the time to hop on and track with us. May we suffer well with him and in him and for him. May we suffer well with him and in him and for him. Our goal is to be on next Tuesday because, again, we're rocking now on Tuesdays, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't see anything here to comment on. So many of you guys that we love. But we will see you again next Tuesday. Until then, just know we're praying for you and we're believing God with you. We are right in the middle of a critical window in our history. Has the urgency of the hour hit your heart yet? When you look around and you see the pain, when you see the suffering, when you see the rioting and the desperation that has filled the streets, has it actually gotten your attention? To begin 2019, our team began hosting gatherings, holy assemblies, convocations with the heart of Joel chapter 2. Feeling from the Lord that it was time, it was necessary to rally the church, a body, a remnant in the land that would place all of their attention upon Jesus as King and begin to lift their voice, consecrated lovers crying out on behalf of the hour in the land. But last year, the circumstances didn't match the urgency. But does God have your attention? Has the urgency actually hit your heart? Because now in 2020, the circumstances match the urgency. The critical hour, the window that we are standing in as a people requires a response. Can you hear the call from the Lord to empty all of the distractions, to fix your face upon the King, and to empty your heart before him, that he might shake our nation and glorify himself in the midst of this people? The convocations will continue. Will you come